Okay, if you are studying for your real estate exam, I bet you've seen the words encumbrance and lien popping up all over the place. Now, these aren't just vocabulary words you have to memorize for the test. Nope, they are right at the very heart of what property rights are all about. And trust me, understanding them is absolutely crucial for your career. So let's break them down together. So you get the deed to a property, that official piece of paper that says, hey, this is all yours. And it feels like you have absolute power, right? Like total, unrestricted control. But what if I told you that's not always the full story? What if there were other claims or rights that could limit what you can actually do with your own property? And in some cases, even put your ownership at risk. All right, so here's our game plan for this. We're going to start with the big picture, this idea of encumbrances. Then we'll split that into two main types. First, limits on how you can use the property. And second, claims that are all about money, which we call liens. We'll also get into the super important question of who gets paid first, the pecking order. And finally, we'll cover what happens when someone has to enforce their claim. So let's start at the top with the big umbrella term that really covers all of these different limitations. So what in the world is an encumbrance? Well, think of it as any claim or interest that someone else holds on your property that, limits your rights as the owner. But here's the really key part. It's a non-possessory interest. That means they don't get to live there or take it over. The analogy of a shadow on your property's title is perfect. It's there, you've got to deal with it, but it doesn't mean you're getting kicked out of your house. Now, to keep this super simple, just remember that encumbrances basically fall into two main buckets. The first bucket is all about things that limit how you can physically use your property. And the second one, it's all about financial claims against it. It's all about the money. Let's dive into that first use category. This whole category is about those situations where someone else has a right to use a piece of your land, or when there are specific rules about what you can build or do on it. First up is a big one, the easement. This is probably the most common type you're going to run into. It's simply a legal right for someone else to use a portion of your property for a very specific purpose. Like a utility company having an easement to run power lines across your backyard, or maybe a neighbor has one to use part of your driveway to get to their garage. Now, easements come in two main flavors. First, you have an easement appurtenant, which always involves two adjoining properties. One property gets the benefit, we call that the dominant tenement, while the other has the burden, the servient tenement. This kind of easement runs with the land, which is a fancy way of saying it stays in place even if the property gets sold. On the flip side, you have an easement in gross. This gives a right to a specific person or company, like that utility company we just talked about. It's a personal right. It doesn't attach to the land itself. Next up, we've got encroachments. Okay, so picture this. Your neighbor decides to build a brand new fence, but oops, it's 1 foot over your property line. Well, that 1 foot strip of their fence sitting on your land, that's an encroachment. It's a physical intrusion and unauthorized use of your property. This slide is great because it really nails the difference between temporary permission and a permanent rule. A license is just personal, revocable permission to use a property. Like if you tell your friend, hey, you can park in my driveway for the weekend. It's not a legal interest in the land, and you can take that permission back anytime. A deed restriction, though, is a whole different ballgame. It's a legally binding rule that's actually written into the deed itself. It puts limits on what all future owners can do with the property, like, say, restricting the color you're allowed to paint your house. All right, let's switch gears. We've talked about the encumbrances that limit use. Now let's get into the ones that are all about the money, and these are called liens. So what is a lien? It's a financial claim, plain and simple. If you owe someone money, they can place a lien on your property, which basically uses it as collateral for that debt. I think the best way to imagine it is as a giant financial IOU that's been stapled right onto your property's title. And you're not going to be able to sell or refinance that property with a clear title until that IOU gets paid off. Liens also have two main types. A specific lien is tied to just one particular asset. Your mortgage, that's a perfect example. It's a lien that's specifically against your house. But a general lien, well, that's way more powerful. It attaches to all of a person's property, both their real estate and their personal stuff. Certain big IRS tax liens can work like this. Okay, so this is a huge one. What happens if a property has a bunch of different liens on it and it gets sold? Who gets their money first? This is where the whole concept of lien priority comes in, and for your exam, you have got to know this. So lien priority is basically the official pecking order. It's the system that lays out the exact sequence for who gets paid when a property is sold. And it's not always as simple as first come, first served. There are very specific rules to follow. And those rules are all based on one key distinction. Is it a superior lien or a junior lien? Superior liens always jump to the front of the line. The classic example is real estate property taxes. They get paid first, period, no matter what. Everything else is considered a junior lien. And for those junior liens, priority is usually decided by the date they were officially recorded. The rule is first in time, first in right. Let's just picture this as a line at the bank. At the very front of that line, guaranteed, no cutting, are the superior liens. We're talking property taxes. Once they're paid in full, the bank teller moves on to the junior liens, but in the exact order they were recorded. So the first mortgage gets paid, then if there's money left, the second mortgage, and on down the line until the money from the sale is all gone. But what happens if the property owner just doesn't pay the debt and there's a lien sitting on the title? Well, the creditor has to enforce their claim. And that leads us straight to the topic of foreclosure. Foreclosure is the legal process that lien holders use to force the sale of a property so they can get the money they're owed. You can think of it as the ultimate consequence of an unpaid lien. It's the enforcement part of the deal. For your exam, you are definitely going to need to know the two main ways this can happen. Judicial foreclosure, just like the name says, goes through the court system. It requires a lawsuit. Non-judicial foreclosure is usually a lot faster because the original loan documents contain what's called a power of sale clause. This lets the lender sell the property without filing a lawsuit if the borrower defaults. Now, foreclosure is a really tough process, so it's good to know there are alternatives. A deed in lieu of foreclosure is basically when the borrower voluntarily hands the deed back to the lender to settle the debt. And a short sale is when the lender agrees to let the owner sell the property for less than what's owed on the mortgage, which also helps avoid a formal foreclosure. So here's the bottom line, the crucial point to all of this. Encumbrances, whether they're easements limiting how you can use a property or liens claiming money, they aren't just abstract legal terms on a test. They have a huge real-world impact on a property's value and how easily it can be bought or sold. Okay, think of this as your last-minute study guide. If you remember nothing else, remember this. An encumbrance is a limitation on property rights, period. A lien is a specific type of encumbrance that's all about money. Lien priority, with taxes always at the top, decides who gets paid first. And foreclosure is how lenders enforce that lien when a debt goes unpaid. Got it? So let's end with this thought. Now that you know about all these different easements and restrictions and liens that can attach to a property and cloud a title, just think about your future as a real estate pro. How absolutely critical is it to do a thorough title search to protect your clients and make sure a deal goes smoothly? That right there is why all of this matters so much. Good luck on your exam.